Linda, and today I have something a little different for you. I have seen some people talking about books they gave 1 star to. And I thought, well, what are some of the books? I don't give a lot of 1 stars because usually if a book is going to get a 1 star, I've already DNF'd it. So I normally don't give 1 star books. However, that doesn't mean I've never given them. And so I came up with a list of some books that I gave 1 star to. And I actually filmed a video about it. And then when I was editing it, I thought, you know, I'm not so sure about this. One of the books on that list is by an author who's still currently writing, is not really well known. And I think if someone saw a video of someone talking about how horrible they thought one of her books was and why, and why I didn't like it, why I felt it only deserved 1 star, I do think that could probably negatively impact her career. So I decided to just scrap that video and we're gonna do it again with 4 books. The 4 books that remain on this list, I originally had 5. The 4 books that remain on this list are written by authors for various reasons that would not at all be in any way impacted by anything that I would say about them. And I am going to try to be as fair and objective, not objectionable, objective as I can about these books, but they are books that I had really big problems with. As I said, I have 4. I will share my rating, which is almost always 1 star, and the Goodreads ratings and how many reviews or how many ratings it received. So these are probably what I would consider, no, I'm not going to say that. These are 4 books that I consider horrible books. Not just they weren't for me books, but these are bad books. 2 of which I would say are the worst books I've ever read, but I'll get to that. So the first book I'm going to talk about is actually a short story. It's an Amazon single or a Kindle single. If you aren't familiar, these are short stories written by well-established authors, and Amazon puts them out, I don't know, a few times a year. You can usually get the Kindle version or an audio version of it. And I like these because it's a great way to sample a new author, but also it gives authors a chance to maybe experiment in a style that they don't normally write in, or to challenge themselves in some way. And it's a really kind of low stakes way for them to do that. So normally when I read these and I don't like them, it's not a big deal. But this one I didn't like it was bad, but then there's a very specific reason why I didn't like it. So this story is Dog People by Jennifer Weiner. I gave it 1 star. It has 562 ratings, and the average Goodreads rating is 2.56 stars, so I wasn't that far off. Now, I love Jennifer Weiner. Jennifer Weiner is a very strong author. She has a very long career. I recommend her books all the time. And she has written quite a few of these Amazon singles, and some of them worked and some of them haven't. If they don't work, they don't work. It's just, it was an attempt, and we can't all be perfect, and that's fine. This one, however, I had big problems with. First of all, I didn't think it was a very well-crafted story. It was like, it didn't have, when you write a short story, you have to pack enough meat in a small package. And I didn't feel like she had done that. That's not enough really to make me think it's a horrible story, because that happens frequently in these sort of short stories that are put out. But I know a lot about Jennifer Weiner. She's very good about talking about her life. She's very open on social media, and she puts a lot of herself into her books. And one thing that is very well known about Jennifer Weiner is that she loves dogs. In all of her books, there's a canine character. I believe in all of her books. And I remember there being a canine character in all of her books. And she has written about the dogs she's had in her life. She always gets rescue dogs, and she always talks about them. She's an advocate for rescuing dogs and cats. I'm sure she would advocate for cats too, but so she walks the walk. This book is not for dog people. Not to give anything away, but I was so shocked that this book kind of betrayed everything I knew about Jennifer Weiner in what she wrote here. I was completely shocked by it. I was kind of offended, honestly. And man, and this is not just a case of me thinking this story didn't work. I really had problems with this. Now, that's not to say that I think Jennifer Weiner is a bad author. As I said, I recommend her books all the time. let me give you something to, instead of reading this, I will tell you that my favorite one of her books, and she's written quite a few, but my favorite is her second novel, which is called In Her Shoes. It was made into a movie. The movie's different enough that, you know, I think of them as separate things. It's about two sisters who have absolutely nothing in common except they wear the same size shoes. And the thing about Jennifer Weiner is because she's been writing for like 20 years, she always writes at the point of life where she is. So this was her second book. This is a book that's about 20-year-olds. It's sort of targeted toward 20-year-olds. And it was written in a time when there was a label for books called chick lit. And Jennifer Weiner actually really embraced that label of chick lit. Which I applaud her for, because she recognizes her books for what they are, and they are commercial. However, I don't think her books were chick lit. They have way too much heft to be chick lit. But I would still recommend that if you want, for a good place to start with Jennifer Weiner. I will say, as for what she's writing now, and it's a little hard to be too critical of it, because I know that at least her last two books were written during the pandemic, and I think that everybody's a little bit, you know, during that time. But she's been missing a little bit with her later books. I think she's just trying to figure out what she wants to write about at this point in her life. She does have a book coming out later this summer called The Breakaway, I think, and I'm looking forward to reading that one. Okay, the next two books. Now, the next two books are the two books that I consider the two worst books I have ever read. Again, I feel I can say this because this is not going to impact the authors in any way for a couple reasons. But one reason for both of them is that they're both deceased. So it is what it is, but they are no longer with us. The first one is Out of Egypt by Anne Rice. No, I'm not an Anne Rice fan. I've read one of her books. I don't remember which one it was. I know it was an Interview with the Vampire, but it was very much a vampire-y, that sort of thing. It was very much in that vein, but it wasn't that book. So when she said she was writing a novel about Jesus, I will admit that I picked this book up knowing that it would not be good, or suspecting, I should say, suspecting that it would not be a good book. Her writing was always very sensual. And I mean that, I do mean that in sort of a sexual way, but I also just mean that in that she always really kind of pulled the details out and kind of milked everything for what it was worth. And she had a certain voice that really lended itself to books like Interview with a Vampire. But I was really perplexed about this book, and I was really worried, because what is she going to do to Jesus? So I was not wrong. This book was terrible. What I was wrong about was why it was terrible. I started this book being afraid there'd be vampires. And about halfway through the book, I was praying that there would be vampires, because this book was so boring. She took a story that everyone already knew. So it's the story of Jesus when he's like 13 years old and they go to the temple and his parents leave him. I mean, it's not even the most exciting story about Jesus, but that's the story she told. And everyone knows it. Now, there are always ways to kind of make stories, you know, especially well-known stories, more interesting. She didn't do any of that. She just wrote this straight out in the most uncomplicated way. There were no sensual, I don't want to say sensual. There were no evocative details in it. There was nothing. She also, I think she was trying to write with like the voice of a 13-year-old boy, I think. It actually came across like she was writing with the voice of a like 7-year-old boy. It was really weird. There's so many ways she could have gone wrong with this, and I did not expect this one. I was reading a review from the Washington Post of this book, and they had this great line about it, which was, Anne Rice sucks the life out of the greatest story ever told. And I think that's really all you need to know about it. Forgot to mention, I did give this 1 star. Now it has a 3.6 rating with 14,498 ratings. I honestly think a lot of that is just from people who really like Anne Rice. And I will say, if an author that I really liked wrote a novel, so not a short story. So let's say Jennifer Weiner wrote a really horrible novel. I probably wouldn't give it 1 star, because I do like Jennifer Weiner. I feel okay doing that with a short story in this particular case. But I cannot see how people would even find this remotely entertaining. It was just tedious. Oh, and when you're waiting for vampires to show up with Jesus, something has gone horribly wrong. Now, I'll give you an alternate to this book. If you want to read a book about Jesus that's not that, I would recommend Lamb, The Gospel According to Biff, Christ's Childhood Pal by Christopher Moore. I love this book. Christopher Moore is an author who does not always work for me, but he really works here. The best way to describe this book is if the Farrelly brothers, who wrote like There's Something About Mary, I think they did that movie, if they made a movie about Jesus and Biff, his best friend, was played by Will Ferrell. That's the way I can describe this book. There's a lot of potty humor in it. There's a lot of like adolescent boy kind of humor, and I can understand how that would turn people off. However, I don't find this book to be in the least bit disrespectful to religion, and I've read it 3 times now in book clubs, and in these book clubs I've had friends who were agnostic or atheist, and they have loved it just as much. It's just a very, this is just great comedic writing, and it still makes you think. I really enjoyed this one. So again, that one is Lamb, The Gospel According to Biff, Christ's Childhood Pal by Christopher Moore. Also, the audio of that one's really good. The last time I read it was on audio. So, the next book, which is the second book that I consider one of the 2 worst books I've ever read. It's a little hard for me to talk about because I do actually want to be respectful about this. But it's Cleaving, A Story of Marriage, Meat, and Obsession by Julie Powell. I gave this book 1 star, and it has a Goodreads average rating of 2.46 stars with about 4,500 ratings, which is a very low Goodreads rating. That's low. So Julie Powell, if you are not aware, is the Julie of Julie and Julia. And I think it's important to set up how I read this book. I originally read the book Julie and Julia when it came out. And then I saw the movie Julie and Julia. And then I read this book. So when I read the book, Julie and Julia, I liked the project she was doing. I liked that whole thing of blogging and working your way through, but I didn't like Julie Powell. And it was more like, this isn't a person I really like. But, the rest of the book I kind of enjoyed. And then the movie came out, and Julie Powell is played by Amy Adams. And she did a very good job of making a character who's not that likable as she could. And I think by the time that I got to Cleaving, in my mind, I'd forgotten about the Julie Powell of the book and was remembering the Amy Adams Julie Powell. So I went into this book not remembering that I already didn't like her. So, first thing about this book, and I would give this warning if I had given this book 5 stars. So I do think this is actually like a trigger warning, important thing to do. As you can kind of tell by the title, this book's about butchering. She decides after the whole Julie and Julia thing that she needs to do something new, and she wants to learn how to be a butcher. So she goes to like upstate New York or Long Island, someplace out of the city, and becomes an apprentice butcher. And Julie Powell is a strong writer. I mean, she's a good, solid writer. And she writes very descriptive passages about butchering meat. If you are vegetarian, if you are squeamish, any of that, this book's not for you. And if you are not that, this book is also not for you. Julie Powell she died a few months ago. She was a very troubled person. I'm not going to play armchair psychologist and try to figure out what it was, but this woman was dealing with something. She had her demons. And this book was, the demons were at play, but she didn't know it. I have this feeling about memoir, that a memoir is like standing next to a person and looking out of a window with them. So you want them to be standing in front of a big, huge window so you can see everything. And sometimes they're actually looking through a little tiny window like that. I think Julie Powell was looking at a blank wall. It was a really uncomfortable experience reading this book. Reading about someone who's dealing with something like this without them being aware of it is uncomfortable. But there was also this tone of like, I am the victim. You as a reader need to be on my side. You as a reader need to be mad at these people I'm mad at, who are mad at my behavior, but I'm not taking responsibility for it. And it was very infuriating. I was almost in disbelief with what I was reading on the page. And honestly, that's probably why I continued reading it. I think that she needed to not write this memoir. And as a side note, this is why I have chosen not to, well, listen to, because I have the audiobooks, but listen to Spare or Matthew Perry's memoirs, because I think in the same thing. They are not in a place where they should be writing memoirs. They do not have that self-awareness. As I said, this book was solidly written, and just on that, I probably could have given it at least 2 stars, but I was so angered and offended by what was in this book that I couldn't do it. The writing meant nothing at that point. So I had to give it 1 star. And also, as I said, what I say isn't going to affect her, A, because she's deceased, but also this book did actually tank her career. She didn't really write anything after that. I think she might have written a few articles here and there, but her writing career was over after this book. It was so badly received. And her behavior to her critics after this book came out did not win her anything. She at that point was still playing with the demons. So I would consider this book what I call a hot mess express book, which I'm not against hot mess express books. I think they can be enlightening and entertaining, but only when they're written with some sort of objectivity. So instead of this book, I'm going to recommend probably the most famous hot mess express book, and that's Wild: From Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail by Cheryl Strayed. Cheryl Strayed, in the time that's recounted in this book, was going through pretty much this. I mean, she was kind of at the same level of dysfunction that Julie Powell was. But Cheryl Strayed wrote this book decades or so later. She was in a much better place. She was able to look back at her life and own her decisions, take responsibility for her actions, and see what was going on, and see really what her motivations were when at the time she couldn't. It's also, Cheryl Strayed is a fantastic writer, so that's fun. She is a hot mess in this book. I will tell you that. If you don't like books about hot messes, don't read this book. But otherwise, yes, this is the book that I would recommend instead of that. And now finally, we're to the last book on my list, and I have to confess here, there's a little bit of a bait and switch. That's not to say this book wasn't horrible. This book was absolutely horrible. It was horrible on every single level. I, however, did not give it 1 star. I gave it 2 stars. And if you watch my channel, you've known in videos past, sometimes I'll say, well, like, this is a 4-star book, but for this kind of book, it's kind of like a 5-star book. Whatever. In this case, a 2-star is like a 5-star, because this book was so horrible in all the worst ways that it just was one of a kind. So I'm not going to tell you the title or show you the cover just yet. But this book, the author is listed as Harlan Sanders. What you need to know about Harlan Sanders is he was a colonel. I'll let you think about that one for just a second. And now I'm going to put up here the cover of the book. You recognize that guy? Colonel Sanders. This is a KFC romance. Kentucky Fried Chicken romance. Let me read the synopsis to you. When Lady Madeline Parker runs away from Parker Manor and a loveless betrothal, she finally feels like she is in control of her life. But what happens when she realizes she can't control how she feels? When she finds herself swept into the arms of Harlan, a handsome sailor with a mysterious past, Madeline realizes she must choose between a life of order and a man of passion. Can love overcome lies? What happens in the embrace of destiny on the tender wings of desire? So yes, this is Tender Wings of Desire, written by Colonel Sanders, published by Kentucky Fried Publishing. I'm not kidding. That's actually the publisher of this book. So this is a closed door romance. I'm going to say that right out there. You don't have to worry about sex scenes, because this book is not original recipe spicy, because there's all sorts of KFC puns in this. It is badly written on every single level. The plot is stupid. The writing is bad. And even though it's not original recipe spicy, it in the romantic scenes, frequently the phrase "finger licking good" is used. I don't know who thought that KFC should be writing romance novels. I don't know, but I'm not sure if they should be shot or thanked, because wow, this was so horrible, but I will never forget it. I have not laughed so hard at a non-comedic book in my life. I don't have a comparison to this book because there is no book to compare it to, at least not until the Hamburglar comes out with something. But wow. Yes. So yes, the KFC romance, horrible, every level, so horrible. It was actually kind of good. I'll never read it again, ever. I never want to go through that experience again, but I will never forget the experience that I had reading this truly terrible book. So there you go. There are some 4 terrible books that I read, so you don't have to, and 3 recommendations on much better books to read. So if you enjoyed this video, thank you very much, and like this video, you know, do a little thumbs up, and click subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much.